The Starfall Cafe sat at the edge of Station Omega-7, a massive trade hub where ships from 1,000 worlds came to refuel and resupply. Before jumping into the deeper reaches of space, Marcus Chan wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better days and looked out at the endless stream of aliens walking past his window. He was human, one of the last ones in this sector, and he ran what most people called a repair shop disguised as a diner. The coffee was terrible, but the repairs were legendary. Most species had given up on manual repairs centuries ago when nanoforges and automated systems made the old ways seem primitive and slow. But Marcus still worked with his hands, and he still understood machines the way his grandfather had taught him back on Earth. It made him strange to most aliens who walked through his door sometimes. They laughed at his methods, and sometimes they shook their heads at his stubbornness. But when their fancy technology failed them, and when the automated systems declared something unfixable, they always came back to the human with the greasy hands and the patient eyes. The station lights dimmed to signal the end of the cycle, and Marcus reached for the close sign hanging by the door. He was tired, and his back ached from bending over. A Valari navigation unit all afternoon, a cup of synthetic coffee, and his bunk sounded like paradise right about now. The door chimed before his fingers touched the sign. Marcus turned and felt his breath catch in his throat. She was Draconid, one of the dragon people from the Ember Worlds, and she was clearly young, despite being nearly as tall as him. Her scales shimmered like dying stars, shifting between deep purple and burning orange as the light hit them at different angles. 2 horns curved back from her forehead like crescent moons, and her eyes glowed with molten gold that seemed to hold all the sorrow in the universe. She could not have been more than the equivalent of 16 human years, and she looked like she had not slept in days. In her arms, she clutched something that made Marcus forget all about being tired. It was a robot, ancient and battered, with a chassis so old that Marcus had only seen its kind in museum archives. The thing was barely holding together with exposed wiring and cracked plating and a power core that flickered like a candle fighting against a storm. The Draconid girl stood in the doorway, and her golden eyes locked onto his with desperate hope. "Mr. Human," she said in a voice that cracked with exhaustion and grief, "please repair my robot." Marcus looked at the machine in her arms, and every diagnostic instinct in his brain screamed that this was impossible. The technology was obsolete by at least 4 centuries and a half. The components probably did not exist anymore. He opened his mouth to tell her that he was sorry, but there was nothing he could do. Then he saw the tears forming in those golden eyes. They were not ordinary tears, but Draconid. Tears that hissed and steamed against her scaled cheeks as they fell. Each one evaporated with a tiny wisp of smoke that rose toward the ceiling like a prayer. "Kid," Marcus said slowly, "this thing is ancient, and I do not even know where I would begin to. It is all I have left of my father." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the chest, and he fell silent. The girl stepped further into the cafe and held the robot tighter against her chest, as if she could protect it from the universe itself. His name was Korath, and he was a warrior of the Ember Guard. She continued, her voice trembling. "The Void Reapers attacked our colony 3 years ago, and my father led the defense fleet against them." She paused and swallowed hard. "He did not come back." Marcus said nothing because there was nothing to say. He had heard stories about the Void Reapers, the nightmare creatures from between the stars that consumed entire worlds and left nothing behind but ash and silence. The war against them had cost millions of lives across dozens of species. Before he left for the battle, the girl went on. "He spent an entire night with this robot, and he told me that he had put something inside it for me to find when I was older." Her clawed fingers traced the cracked plating of the machine with heartbreaking tenderness. "He said it was a message, a gift for when I needed him most. But the robot shut down before it could play, and no one has been able to fix it." She looked up at Marcus with those burning golden eyes. "I have taken it to the Mechanist Guild on Station Prime, and they said It was beyond saving. I brought it to the fabricators union on Nexus 4, and they called it irredeemably corrupted. Every engineer and technician and specialist I could find told me the same thing. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. They told me to let go and move on, but I cannot. I cannot let go of the last piece of my father. I cannot give up on hearing whatever words he wanted me to hear. Marcus stood behind his counter and looked at the broken robot in the arms of a grieving girl, and he thought about his own father who had died when Marcus was just a boy. He remembered the old pocket watch his father had left him, the one that had stopped working years ago, the one that Marcus had spent 6 months repairing, even though everyone told him it was worthless junk. He remembered how it felt to hear that watch tick again for the first time. What is your name, kid? He asked quietly. Pirith, she answered. Pirith of the Ember World, Kethra. Marcus nodded and walked around the counter. He gently took the robot from her arms and carried it to his workbench in the back of the cafe. The machine weighed almost nothing, as if the years had hollowed it out from the inside. He set it down carefully and turned back to face the young Draconid standing in his doorway. Sit down, Pirith, he said, gesturing to one of the warm booths by the window. I will make some coffee, and you are going to tell me everything you know about this robot. Everything your father ever said about it. Every memory you have. He reached for the close sign and flipped it to show the word open, facing outward. This is going to be a long night. Pirith stared at him with something that might have been disbelief. You will try? She asked. Even though everyone says it is impossible. Marcus smiled. A tired but genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Kid, I am human. We do not believe in impossible. We just see it as a challenge that has not been beaten yet. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her before returning to his workbench. The robot sat there like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Like a treasure chest that refused to open. Like a father's last words trapped in a prison of broken circuits and dead code. Marcus cracked his knuckles and picked up his oldest and most trusted screwdriver. All right, old friend, he murmured to the machine. Let us see what secrets you are hiding. Outside the cafe window, the stars burned cold and distant in the endless void. Inside, a human mechanic began the impossible task of bringing a dead machine back to life, and a dragon girl with golden eyes dared to hope for the first time in 3 years. 3 days had passed since Pirith walked into the Starfall Cafe, and Marcus Chun had not slept for more than a few hours at a time. Robot sat on his workbench like a patient on an operating table. Its ancient chassis opened up to reveal the nightmare of obsolete technology hidden inside. Marcus had seen a lot of strange machines in his 20 years as a mechanic, but nothing had prepared him for this. The neural pathways used crystalline matrices that had not been manufactured in 400 years. The power core ran on principles that predated faster than light travel itself. Half the components did not exist anymore, and the other half had been damaged so badly that any sane engineer would have declared them beyond recovery. But Marcus was not any sane engineer. He was human, and humans had a very different relationship with the word impossible. Pirith had barely left the shop since that first night. She slept curled up in one of the booths with her long tail wrapped around herself like a security blanket, and she woke every few hours to check on his progress. Times she would pad over to the workbench on silent feet and watch him with those golden eyes full of hope and fear. Marcus never chased her away, even when her hovering made his work harder. He understood what it meant to wait for a miracle. The Galactic Network was useless for this kind of repair work. There were no schematics available for a machine this old, and no repair guides that covered its unique architecture. The species that had originally built this robot had gone extinct during the Second Expansion War nearly 3 centuries ago. Their technology had died with them, and the few surviving examples were locked away in museums, where no one was allowed to touch them. Marcus did not have access to museums or historical archives or extinct alien engineers. All he had was his own 2 hands and a stubbornness that his mother had always said would be the death of him. He started by reverse engineering the neural matrices. From first principles, this meant taking apart each crystalline structure, piece by piece, and mapping its connections by hand. He filled notebook after notebook with diagrams and calculations. Working through problems that would have taken a computer hours to solve, his handwriting grew messier as the hours passed, but his understanding grew sharper. When he finally understood how the neural pathways functioned, he moved on to the next problem. The replacement crystals did not exist, so he would have to make them himself. Marcus dragged out equipment meant for repairing starship reactors and jury-rigged it to grow synthetic crystals with the exact properties he needed. The process was delicate and dangerous, and he burned his fingers twice when the temperature controls fluctuated. But by the end of the 2nd day, he had a handful of crystals that glowed with the same soft blue light as the originals. The software was even harder than the hardware. The robot ran on programming languages so old that they had been forgotten by every species in known space. Marcus found fragments of documentation in ancient databases and taught himself the basics through trial and error. He wrote compatibility patches that connected the old code to modern power systems. He built translation layers that allowed dead protocols to speak to living ones. He created workarounds for problems that had no official solutions. Other aliens began to gather outside the CAF windows as word spread through the station. A Valari merchant with clicking mandibles watched for hours at a time too. Kethrak traders with their forearms crossed in disapproval stopped by every evening. A Silithian diplomat with skin that shifted colors like a mood ring pressed her face against the glass like a child watching a magic show. They all thought Marcus was wasting his time. You know, it will not work, the Valari merchant said through the open door on the 3rd morning. That machine is dead beyond any hope of revival, and the girl should accept the truth. Marcus did not look up from his soldering work. In the 21st century, he said calmly, humans landed on their moon using computers less powerful than a modern coffee maker. We built them with slide rules and paper calculations when the rest of the galaxy was still figuring out fire. The Valari made a dismissive, clicking sound. What is your point? Human, my point is that my species has never met a problem we could not spite into submission. Marcus connected the final relay and watched as a tiny spark of light flickered through the new neural pathways. Now get out of my light because you are blocking my view. The Valari retreated with an offended huff, but the crowd outside grew larger. Pirith watched them watching Marcus, and she felt something strange bubbling up in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as pride. This human, with his primitive tools and his stubborn heart, was doing what the greatest engineers in the galaxy had said could not be done. He was not doing it for money or fame or glory. He was doing it because a grieving girl had asked him for help. On the 3rd night, Marcus hit a wall that seemed truly insurmountable. The memory core where the message was stored had been corrupted by power fluctuations over the years. The data was still there somewhere buried in the crystalline storage, but accessing it would require solving an encryption puzzle that the original builders had never intended anyone to crack. Marcus sat back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. For the first time since this project began, he felt doubt creeping into his heart. Maybe the others were right. Maybe some things really were impossible. Pirith appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee that she had learned to make over the past 3 days. You look troubled, she said softly. Is something wrong? Marcus took the coffee and drank deeply before answering. The memory core is encrypted, and the key died with the species that built this robot. Without it, I cannot access your father's message no matter how. While I repair everything else. Pirith's golden eyes dimmed with disappointment, but she did not cry. Then we have failed, she whispered. I did not say that. Marcus set down his coffee and turned back to the workbench. said the key died with the species that built this robot, but that does not mean there is no other way. He pulled up the diagnostic display and studied the encryption patterns with fresh eyes. Your father spent an entire night with this machine before his last battle. He was not a programmer or an engineer. He was a warrior. So how did he manage to upload a message into a system this complex? Pirith frowned in thought. I never considered that. Neither did anyone else. Marcus leaned closer to the display, and his tired eyes suddenly widened. There is a secondary access port hidden in the voice recognition matrix. Your father did not crack the encryption. He found a backdoor. His fingers flew across the interface as he traced the hidden pathway. And if I can find where that backdoor leads, then maybe, just maybe I can follow his footsteps. Pirith watched as the human dove back into his work with renewed energy. Outside the cafe, the crowd had grown to dozens of aliens, all waiting to see if the impossible could become possible inside. A single human mechanic refused to give up, and somewhere deep in the ancient machine, a father's last words waited to be heard. The robot's eyes flickered to life on the fourth morning. It was just a tiny glow at first, barely visible in the harsh lights of the cafe. But Pirith saw it from across the room and made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She rushed toward the workbench and her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Marcus caught her arm before she could fall and steadied her with a gentle grip. Easy, kid, he said in a voice rough with exhaustion. It is still booting up and the core is stable, but the memory retrieval might take a few minutes to initialize. Pirith could not speak. She could only stare at the machine that held her father's last words. The robot was beautiful in a way she had never noticed before. Its chassis still bore the scars of age and damage, but the new crystals Marcus had grown glowed with soft blue light. The repairs were not invisible, but they were honest. They showed that someone had cared enough to fight for this machine when everyone else had given up. The optical sensors focused slowly like eyes adjusting to light after a long darkness. The internal fans began to hum with a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing, and then the robot spoke. Pirith. The voice was warm and deep, and it resonated with the particular harmonic that draconid vocal cords produced. It sounded like distant thunder wrapped in velvet. It sounded like safety and strength and unconditional love. It sounded like her father. Pirith's golden eyes overflowed with tears that hissed and steamed against her scaled cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She did not even try. My little ember. The voice continued as a holographic image flickered to life above the robot's chassis. If you are hearing this, then I'm gone, and you have found someone with enough skill and enough stubbornness to wake old. Keep her from his long sleep. The hologram showed a massive draconid male with scales the color of volcanic rock and scars that mapped a lifetime of battles across his body. His horns were chipped and worn, but his eyes burned with the same molten gold as his daughter's. He was smiling with a warmth that transformed his fierce warrior's face into something gentle and fatherly. I recorded this message the night before the Void Reapers came to our world. The hologram said, I knew there was a chance I might not return from the battle, and the thought of leaving you alone in this universe was almost more than I could bear. Korath's image shifted as if he was settling into a more comfortable position, but I could not let that fear stop me from doing what needed to be done. The Reapers would have destroyed everything if we did not stand against them. Your mother's grave would have been consumed along with every other memory of our people. I could not allow that. Pirith wrapped her arms around herself and let the tears flow freely. Behind her, Marcus stood in the corner, pretending very hard that he was not crying. He failed completely. I want you to know something important. My little ember. Korath continued. Every moment I spent with you was worth more than all the treasures in the galaxy. From the day you hatched and looked up at me with those big golden eyes, I knew that my life had a purpose beyond battle and glory. You were that purpose. You were my reason to fight. You were my reason to hope." The hologram's expression grew more serious. "Your mother would be so proud of the young dragon you have become. She watches over you from beyond the veil between worlds. And I know she smiles every time you show kindness or courage or strength. You have her spirit, Pirith. That fire that burns inside you comes from her. Never let anyone extinguish it." Korath leaned forward as if he wanted to reach through time and space to touch his daughter one more time. "I know the days ahead will be hard. I know you will face darkness and pain and moments when you want to give up. But I also know that you are stronger than you realize. You carry the blood of warriors and the heart of a dreamer. You are capable of amazing things, my Ember. Do not ever forget that." The hologram flickered for a moment, and when it stabilized, Korath was smiling again. "I want to tell you about the robot that carries this message. His name is Keeper, and I have known him since I was younger than you are now. He was my father's companion before he was mine, and he has been with our family through 3 generations of joy and sorrow. I chose him to carry my final words because I knew he would guard them with everything he had. He is stubborn that way. I suppose that is why we got along so well." Pirith looked at the robot with new eyes. This was not just a machine. This was a family heirloom. This was a piece of her history that stretched back further than she had ever imagined. "Take care of Keeper, and he will take care of you," Korath said. "He knows things about our family that even I never learned, and someday when you are ready, he will share those secrets with you." The hologram stood tall and proud like a warrior preparing for battle. "And now, my little Ember, I must say goodbye. Not forever. I do not believe in forever endings. Somewhere beyond the stars I will be waiting for you. Your mother will be there too. And when your time comes many, many years from now, we will welcome you home with open arms." Tears streamed down the hologram's face, but Korath's smile never wavered. "I love you, Pirith. I love you more than words can express. I love you until the last star dies and beyond. Be brave, my Ember. Be kind. Be everything I know you can be, and never forget that your dragon papa is proud of you. Always." The hologram flickered one last time and faded away. Silence filled the cafe, broken only by the soft humming of Keeper's systems and the quiet sounds of Pirith's tears. Marcus stood frozen in the corner with wet tracks on his cheeks that he would deny if anyone asked. He had done many repairs in his life, but none had ever felt like this. This was not about fixing a machine. This was about giving a daughter one more moment with her father. This was about proving that love could survive even death. Pirith reached out and placed her hand on Keeper's chassis. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered. "Thank you for finding me again." The robot's optical sensors glowed warmly, and a familiar voice spoke in gentle tones. "He would be proud of you, young one." "So very proud." Pirith smiled through her tears, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt like maybe everything would be okay. Marcus slipped out of the cafe to give her some privacy. He stood outside under the cold light of distant stars and let his own tears fall without shame. Sometimes being human meant feeling everything at once, and right now that was exactly what he needed to feel. The message had played 17 times over the following week each time. Pirith discovered something new in her father's words, a joke she had forgotten that made her laugh through her tears, an expression on his face that brought back memories of bedtime stories and training sessions, a detail about her mother that she had never known before. Marcus gave her space during those days, working quietly on other repairs, while she sat in the booth by the window and watched her father's hologram over and over again. But eventually, she came to him with questions in her golden eyes and wonder in her voice. "Mr. Human," she said one evening as the station lights dimmed toward the night cycle. "Marcus, I mean." She fumbled with her translator for a moment before continuing. "How did you do it?" Marcus looked up from the Kethrak communication device he was fixing and raised an eyebrow. "Do what exactly?" "Fix Keeper," Pirith said. Every engineer on 7 stations told me it was impossible, and the Mechanist Guild refused to even look at him, and the Fabricators Union called his systems irredeemably corrupted. She gestured toward the robot, who was now happily helping serve drinks to the cafe's growing number of customers. You had no schematics and no spare parts and no documentation, and yet you brought him back to life in 4 days. How is that possible? Marcus set down his tools and leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. That is a complicated question, kid. I'm not sure I have a simple answer. Try. Pirith said. Please. Marcus was quiet for a long moment as he gathered his thoughts. We are a young species, he said finally. Humans have only been traveling among the stars for about 1,000 years, while the Draconids have been out here for 50,000. We do not have your technology or your resources or your accumulated wisdom. By any reasonable measure, we should be insignificant. He smiled slightly. But we have got something else. Something that makes up for all the things we lack. What is that? Pirith asked. Stubbornness, Marcus said. Pure bloody-minded stubbornness that refuses to accept when something cannot be done. He stood up and walked to the window where the endless parade of alien species continued to flow past. Every other intelligent species in this galaxy evolved on relatively comfortable worlds with stable environments and predictable challenges. But Earth was different. Earth tried to kill us every single day. Pirith tilted her head in confusion. What do you mean? I mean that our homeworld was brutal. Marcus explained. We had ice ages that covered half the planet in glaciers, and we survived by adapting and moving and building better shelters. We had plagues that killed millions of us, and we survived by developing medicine and learning how diseases spread. We had predators that were faster and stronger than us, and we survived by making tools and working together. Every time the universe threw something terrible at humanity, we found a way to overcome it. He turned back to face her. That is what makes humans different, Pirith. We do not know how to give up. When we see something that everyone says is impossible, we do not accept that judgment. We look at it, and we think that sounds like a challenge. Pirith looked at Keeper, who was telling a joke to a group of Velari merchants who did not seem to understand the punchline. And that is why you could fix him. That is why I could not try. Marcus corrected. Because somewhere in this universe, there was a girl who had lost her father and who just needed to hear his voice one more time. And I would be damned if I let some obsolete engineering stand in the way of that. He sat back down at his workbench and picked up his tools again. The other species looked at Keeper, and they saw a broken machine. They ran their diagnostics and their probability calculations, and they concluded that repair was statistically impossible. But I looked at Keeper, and I saw a story. I saw a robot that had been part of your family for 3 generations. I saw a father who loved his daughter so much that he spent his last night alive making sure she would have something to remember him by. I saw a treasure that was worth fighting for. Marcus shrugged. Numbers and statistics cannot measure that kind of value. Only a heart can. Pirith was silent for a long time as she processed his words. On my world, she said slowly, we have stories about the great dragon ancestors who could breathe fire hot enough to melt mountains and fly fast enough to outrace the wind. We tell our children that those ancestors watch over us and guide us in our darkest hours. She looked at Marcus with an expression he could not quite read. I think humans might be something like that for the rest of the galaxy. Not gods or ancestors, but something equally important. What do you mean? Marcus asked. You are the ones who do not give up, Pirith said. You are the ones who look at impossible problems and see puzzles waiting to be solved. You are the ones who fight for things that have no statistical value, but infinite emotional worth. She smiled. Maybe that is what humans are for. Maybe you exist to remind the rest of us that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds say we should surrender. Marcus felt his cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. That is giving U.S. a lot of credit, kid. We are just as flawed as everyone else. Maybe. Pirith agreed. But your flaws seem to include an inability to accept defeat, and that is not such a bad flaw to have. She stood up and walked over to Keeper, who immediately stopped his joke to give her his full attention. My father chose this robot to carry his message because he trusted him, because they had a history together, because some things cannot be measured in statistics and probability. She turned back to Marcus. And I think my father would have liked you very much, Marcus. Chun, you have the same kind of stubbornness he had. The same refusal to accept that love can be defeated by something as simple as death. Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and went back to his repairs. But there was a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room, and when he looked at the growing crowd of aliens outside his window, he could not help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the kid was right. Maybe that was what humans were for after all. Word spread through the galaxy, the way all good stories do, quietly at first, and then all at once until everyone had heard some version of the tale. The human mechanic on Station Omega 7, who had repaired the unrepairable, the dragon girl who had heard her dead father's voice after 3 years of silence. The ancient robot brought back from the dead by nothing more than stubbornness and skill. Within a week, Marcus had more work than he could handle. Ships arrived from distant systems carrying machines that had been declared unsalvageable by experts across known space, heirlooms from extinct civilizations and broken, gifts from departed loved ones, and devices so old that their original purpose had been forgotten. The customers did not come for cheap repairs or quick fixes. They came because they had heard about the human who did not believe in impossible. A Silithian matriarch brought a music box that had belonged to her grandmother and had not played in 2 centuries. Marcus worked on it for 3 days, and when the first notes finally chimed through the cafe, the matriarch wept tears of liquid silver. A Kethrak warrior brought a ceremonial blade with an electronic core that had stopped functioning during his father's funeral rite. Marcus replaced components that did not exist anymore with substitutes he invented himself, and the blade hummed with power once again. A Valara child brought a toy that had been her only comfort during the refugee crisis that had displaced her family. Marcus repaired it in an afternoon and refused to accept any payment. The Draconids sent an official delegation within a month. Then the Silithians sent their own representatives. Then species that Marcus had never even heard of began arriving to see the legendary human mechanic with their own eyes. They called him many things in their various languages. The stubborn one, the miracle worker. The human who does not know when to quit. Marcus hated all of the names, but he kept working anyway because that was what he did. That was what humans did. Pirith stayed. She had intended to leave after hearing her father's message and return to her colony to grieve in private. But something had changed inside her during those days in the cafe. She found herself wanting to learn from this strange human who talked to machines like they were old friends and saw connections that computer models missed. "You are teaching me," she said one evening after watching Marcus coax a dead engine back to life with nothing but patience and intuition. Marcus smiled without looking up from his work. "I am teaching you to see," he corrected. "Anyone can follow a schematic or run a diagnostic program, but the best mechanics are the ones who understand that every machine has a story." He set down his tools and turned to face her. "Some people call it a soul, but that word makes engineers uncomfortable, so I just call it heart." "Heart," Pirith repeated. "Every machine that matters was built by someone who cared about what they were creating," Marcus explained. "And every machine that has been used and loved carries the echoes of that care inside it." He nodded toward Keeper, who was serving drinks on the other side of the cafe. "Your father understood that when he chose Keeper to carry his message, he did not just pick a random robot with enough storage capacity. He chose a robot that had been part of your family for generations. a robot he had known and worked with and trusted. Pirith looked at Keeper with new understanding. The message was only half of the gift. Exactly. Marcus said. The other half was making sure that message lived in something your father loved, so that when you finally heard it, you would feel a jam in every word. Not just his voice, but his presence, his history, his heart. Pirith felt tears forming in her eyes again, but they were different tears this time. Not tears of grief, but tears of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, not just for fixing Keeper, but for understanding what he meant to my father and to me. Marcus handed her a rag to wipe her eyes. That is what humans are for, kid. Understanding and stubbornness and occasionally performing mechanical miracles. He winked. Now, dry your face because Keeper is about to tell the story about the time your father accidentally insulted a HFY war chief, and trust me, you do not want to miss the ending. Pirith laughed through her tears as Keeper launched into an animated retelling of one of Korith's more embarrassing adventures. The cafe filled with the sound of alien laughter as the robot described how a young, Draconid warrior had mistaken a HFY mating dance for a combat challenge and nearly started an interstellar incident. Marcus watched it all from his workbench with a smile on his weathered face. This was what he had always wanted, even if he had not known it until now, not just fixing machines, but giving people back the pieces of their hearts that they thought were lost forever. The door chimed, and another customer walked in carrying another broken device with another impossible story. Marcus cracked his knuckles and reached for his tools. All right, he said to himself. Let us see what secrets you are hiding. Outside the coffee window, the stars burned bright with the light of 1 billion distant suns. Inside, a human mechanic and a dragon girl worked side by side, and an ancient robot named Keeper told jokes that had not been funny in 400 years, but that somehow made everyone laugh anyway. Years later, when Pirith had become one of the greatest engineers in Draconid history, she would look back on her time in the Starfall Cafe as the turning point of her life. She had arrived as a grieving child carrying the broken remains of her father's last gift. She had left as a woman who understood that love and stubbornness in heart could overcome any obstacle. She had learned that from a human, and she had never forgotten the lesson: technology fades and civilizations rise and fall, and stars are born and die in the endless cycle of the universe. But love finds a way to survive, especially when there is a stubborn human around to help it along. That was the last gift Marcus Chun gave to Pirith of the Ember World, Kethera. Not just her father's voice, but the knowledge that nothing is truly impossible, not as long as someone cares enough to try.